Thank you to all of you who are joining us here in person at the Capitol. We're in the Senate building. And those of you who are joining us online, welcome. It's a treat to be back together in person. It's been 2 years since we've done these in person. And I'm stepping in just temporarily. We anticipate Mayor Silvestrini will be here to conduct. But the entire year that I was chair of LPC, they were all online. So I'm like, this is my one and only, time to get to be here with all of you and conduct this meeting in person. So welcome and thank you for joining us. We're going to, let me make this official as we're recording this meeting. This is the Utah League of Cities and Towns Legislative Policy Committee. Today is January 24th, 2022. My name is Dawn Ramsey. I'm the mayor of South Jordan City and have the privilege of serving as president of the League of Cities and Towns this year. We have some minutes from our January 19th and our December 13th meetings that have been sent out, and I'm wondering if anybody's had a chance to review those and would like to make a motion or make any amendments to those. If there's no amendments, can I get a motion to approve those minutes? Thank you. Who was the second? Okay, I'm not sure who's keeping track of that, but I don't have a pen with me. So is somebody keeping track of this? Excellent. Okay, great. All right, we have a motion and a second on the minutes. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes from December 13th and January 19th, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, those minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, I'm going to shoot it over to Carson. He's going to go over some logistics for us. And after Carson, I'm going to turn it straight over to talk about all of the legislation that's happening right now. We'll get a lot of updates. We'll start with water conservation with Justin Lee after Carson's done.
Thank you, Mayor Ramsey. I appreciate the introduction. So just to review minutes, I know just to review logistics. I know we talked briefly about this last week, but so you all know we're still planning to hold all of the meetings hybrid. In this room as the in-person location, and then each meeting has its Zoom link on our website. Since all of you are either here or online, I'm hoping you found where to get that information, so I'm not going to worry too much about this slide. Just one last reminder, if you have changes to your LPC roster, I know there's still a few outstanding ones that we've not gotten to yet that you might have emailed to us, so we'll keep working to update it, but if you have changes and you haven't talked to us, please let us know. You can find all of the information on our website at ulct.org/LPC. Oh. This is a good sign. If any of you aren't subscribed to Friday Facts yet, please also let us know. We'll sign you up for that. We'll send out nightly emails to everybody on our Friday Facts email list. We'll also send out some information on Friday Facts summarizing what happened for the week, but that's the best way to stay involved. Again, we'll send out action alerts to you at some point this session when we start moving things along, asking you to engage with your legislators. Those will be the highest priority bills that we need your engagement on. We'll either specify what the bill is, why it concerns us, and then where the bill is in, whether it's in committee, whether it's on a floor vote. So we'll provide that information for you, but just keep an eye out for that. Lastly, bill tracking. By show of hands, have all of you found the bill tracker yet online? Okay, I'm seeing most of your hands. I'll just add one quick reminder. If you go to this website here, ulct.org/bills, it'll pull up our list. If any of you are interested in participating in our, this is the public-facing side. We also have a more interactive version, but you'll need to create a password. If you're interested in using that interactive version, all LPC members are entitled to do that, but please reach out to me and I'll send you a registration link. Any other questions on bill tracking or general logistics? I don't want to dwell on this for too long, so we have a lot to talk about today. And I'm not online, but Cam, is there anything there? Weird at me asking you those questions. Okay, well, that's all I have on. Voting at all? Oh. Yeah, so voting. So if you go to our website as well, ulct.org/LPC, again, one-stop shop there. You'll see the voting roster. If you're a voting member, it's irritating. If you're a voting member, you're welcome to cast votes. You're welcome to make motions. If you're in person, we'll just, whenever there's an opportunity to vote, just raise your hand for yes, and then we'll ask for a no, and you raise your hand then. If you're voting online, as I mentioned in the chat box, we will be soliciting votes in the chat box. So if you're a voting member, please, again, when we open it up for a vote, just type yes or no, and let me know if you have any questions about that. But we're going to try to, we have the virtual voting software still, but we're going to try to use it in the chat box just to be a little bit more nimble and less time consuming for folks online. So yeah, any other questions on logistics? Great, then we can jump into it.
All right, let's talk water issues. Believe it or not, I don't want to spend a ton of time on water issues today because we have some other issues. I'm not saying water's not important. Water is the most important. If we don't get water right, nothing else matters. But we don't have a ton we need to talk about on water today. I do want to give a few updates, a few reminders. A lot of this we've talked about at recent LPCs, as recent as last week even. First, we want to talk about SB 110, water as part of general plan. So if you're new to LPCs, then you've only heard this about one time. If you aren't new to LPC, you've heard us talk about this several times this last year. But this is the bill that we ran through our committees, through our LPC. Mark Stratford from Ogden did a lot of work on this one, and I don't know if he's online, but thank you, Mark, if you're not here in person for all the work on this one. But what this one does is it asks all the cities and the counties to go into their general plan and look at ways that in land use planning we can be aware of water conservation as we're doing that. Looking at how that impacts things, look how water is used when we make land use decisions, looking at alternatives without having a mandate, looking at alternatives to grass, not just turf, for Sean, when we're talking about requirements of what should be in landscaping. So this is one of our bills. Senator Mike McKell is running this at our request. So we hope we all still support this since we've discussed it. But just want to remind everyone we've had a lot of discussions about that. Don't want to take a lot of time. But SB 110 is that numbered bill. Anybody have any questions on that one or any discussion points to it? Perfect. Let's jump to these other two bills. Talking about landscaping and turf, and by turf we mean grass. I'm going to keep clarifying that one. There's a couple of bills out there, and basically the bills, we had a discussion last week where Sean said from St. George, turf means artificial turf. It doesn't just mean grass.
We have a lot of seniors with turf.
So I'm clarifying when I'm saying turf, I mean actual live grass, not like AstroTurf. But there are a couple of bills out there. One is by Robert Spendlove, HB 121, called Water Conservation Modification, and it basically says you can't prohibit people from planting stuff other than grass, saying there's a prohibition on prohibiting things other than turf. I know it's a weird way of saying it, but that's how I'm saying it. He has said that he is likely to sub that bill out so it does not deal with cities. It won't deal with local government. He's going to focus on other entities. So we probably don't need to worry about HB 121. It's still on there until we see the sub, but we probably don't have to spend a lot of time on it. And Gary, I'm going to give you a warning. I'm going to have you speak on Ward's bill in just 1 second. I gave you a warning so you could chew your food. But HB 95 is Ray Ward's bill, and it basically says the same thing. It says cities cannot say you can only use lawn in your landscaping. That's basically what it says, and it says it across the board. Now, we've had some good discussions with Ray Ward, so Gary, I'll have you, if you want to jump up and come talk about the discussions we've had. Ward didn't want to go out and say we couldn't enforce our ordinances. His goal was more narrow, and so we've been talking to Ray Ward, been working with him, and I'll let Gary talk a little bit about that.
Chalk one up for Local Officials Day. At the lunch, our Mayor Harris, and Kate Bradshaw, our council, cornered Ray and asked him about his bill, and we had some concerns with it as a city and as a league. And he clarified his intent really was definitely not to keep us from being able to enforce our ordinances. And what he really wanted to accomplish was to have cities provide options other than turf or grass, Sean. And so what we've done is we provided him with some language that does three things. One, it takes out the enforcement clause, so we have the ability to enforce any of our ordinances. Second, it says that cities cannot require only turf, and that cities will require or will provide homeowners with an alternative to grass in their ordinances. And so he was very happy with that language. I think many of us, if not all of us, already do that, have an alternative to grass, and don't only require grass. And for those that don't, it's probably something to consider because I think it's worked well for most of us. So is that any questions about that?
We'll go right here. Do we need to test on the mic, Liam? The handhold right here. Yeah.
Does this apply to HOAs?
Yes, oh, thank you for that. So it applies to mobile home parks, it applies to HOAs, it applies to counties and to cities.
Could I be excused for a tongue-in-cheek to our good friend from St. George? Do you also have a new definition for non-functional turf? Those of you who have not heard that, that was a reference early on in this process for those portions of your land that people don't actually, or property don't actually walk on the turf and things of that nature. Thank you.
Our city engineer calls that sidewalk.
We've got one online, Carson.
Thanks, Liam. We have a question from Ryan Snow. Is there any distinguishment between Kentucky bluegrass and drought-tolerant grass?
No,
Not in this bill.
not in the bill.
Thanks.
How does this apply to improved open space? Can we require turf in improved open spaces?
So the bill it is applicable in a city to all property owners within a city. And so I think the way it would be read is we could not require that it all be turf, all be grass. And so I don't know if the open space is publicly owned open space or if it's privately owned open space. Okay, so, in the case of a retention basin or something else like that that might be open space or a public park, there's a lot of flexibility there still. It couldn't be 100% turf, or there'd have to be an alternative, but it would still be left up to the property owner voluntarily. If they want to put 100% grass in, they can. It also does not set any kind of a maximum or minimum, so cities can still impose, if you want to, a maximum amount or a minimum amount of turf.
Any other questions on this one, comments?
Probably, but I think that would be a bad idea, Counselor.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
the way it's written, it really doesn't put maximum or minimums. It says you have to allow other alternatives, at least one other one, but it doesn't really. So there's some room there probably for definition maybe, but maybe it's fine where it's at too, depending how you feel.
Just on that point, we felt it was important not to put caps in. The sponsor wasn't asking for caps. The sponsor was really just requiring that cities have another alternative. And so we didn't want to limit our own city's ability to regulate those things.
I will say, I think if you try to work around the bill by saying you need 99% grass or something, then we're going to see a new bill next year that does talk about minimums or maximums. But Ray Ward, I mean, to his credit, he's been willing to work with us, thanks to Gary and Bountiful for doing work on this, getting it to a better place. This is one that, like I said, if there's other things that need to be put in the bill, Ray Ward's been willing to talk to us and work with us, so he's good on that one. So please, if you have suggestions, let's keep talking about this one. We haven't seen the substitute yet, so we'll see, exactly what that looks like before we fully take a position one way or another on this one. But want to put that out there. That's one. And this is one of the governor's ones that he did give a shout out to last week in the State of the State. He does want to see some movement in this area. So this is one that we'll want to make sure we're playing ball on. All right. Cam, you want to come talk retail incentives? Whether you want to or not, it's up to you. So you're next. I said it's probably the wrong question, right? We can go.
Actually,
You can take it which other order.
Let's do public safety, and then I'll do this.
You want to jump down to that?
housing.
All right, we'll jump down. Okay, that's great.
Okay, so John,
John and Molly, sorry, we're going to audible. Have you talked about retirement? Yeah. Retirement public safety.
Not yours. Public safety.
We'd like to talk about John's retirement. John would like to talk about his retirement, I think. I think he could take some time on that. But we've got the slides up, so I'll pass it over to you.
Hello. It's good to be here. I was not here last week because I was doing the COVID battle, but it's good to be here. I'm probably the safest person to shake hands and hug to in the whole building here. We're following two retirement bills that deal with public safety. The first one is House Bill 12, that's Representative Gwynn's bill. The other one is Representative Berkland's bill, which is House Bill 61. We've talked to you about both of those previously, but they both changed, and they both changed dramatically since last time we talked. And last time we talked, House Bill 12 dealt with really four things. It changed the cooling off period after retirement to 60 days from 1 year. It changed the tier 2 retirement to a 20-year retirement. It also paid for that, and it also backfilled back several years to cover that. And then the fiscal bill on that one was enormous, like $42 million. Plus, I think even more concerning to that, it took a retirement fund that was almost fully funded to near 50% funded. And as we talked to Representative Gwynn about that, he's changed that bill tremendously. 3 out of those 4 things are gone. The only thing left on that is the 60-day retirement. Back in 2011, they put the 1-year requirement in. The 60-day requirement now would do a couple things, at least from law enforcement's perspective. Number one, it would part of their concern with the 1 year is that public safety officers lose their certification if they don't keep up to date after 1 year. And so going to 60 days would help that. There is a fiscal note associated with that. Is that next slide? I don't know where we are on these slides.
You're still in the Gwynn bill.
Okay. The fiscal note with this was about $15 million, and it changed what you're required to pay as a percentage. However, as we talked that over, that's a portion of the $42 million that was originally given us on the Gwynn bill. However, we know that it's going to be much less than that because that bill was based on a 60-day window and a 20-year retirement. And so we don't have a fiscal note yet. We've asked URS for a fiscal note. I've texted Representative Gwynn, actually just a couple of minutes ago. I texted him. He hasn't seen one that I know of. And so that's where we are in the bill.
They also think the 3-year repealer that's in there.
Yes.
In talking with URS, they also think that 3-year repealer will also impact the fiscal note. So there's a couple considerations with there on the total fiscal impact.
Question?
Hold on, one second. I'll come with the mic.
Yeah, sorry.
Just so online can hear you.
I guess I had a couple questions. Originally, there was talk about this being specifically to target hiring in rural areas and stuff. Is that component been reserved?
That is, we'll go over that in a minute. That was House Bill 61, Berkland's bill that said you could take advantage of the 60-year window and then go back to work in a smaller community.
Okay. Then I guess the question I have on this one is, your third bullet point requires a retiree shall have bona fide termination from all participating employers. Basically, you can't like say, okay, retire and then come back in 60 days and we'll rehire you. How are they going to enforce that?
They're not.
Okay.
I mean, it's against the law. It's against the law for me to do that or to go to another jurisdiction and say, hey, if I retire, will you hire me in 6 days? Technically, that's against the law, but yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, I would certainly never break that, and so. House Bill 61 is Berkland's bill. We'll talk about that. You can ask that question. It required it reduced the 60-day cooling off period if you went back to work. And these are for teachers and first responders. And it reduces to a 60-day cooling off period if you went back to work for a jurisdiction in a smaller county. That's changed as well. Plus, it also says when you go back to work after 60 days, you can only go part-time, 20 hours a week. Actually, it's 1,040 a year, part-time kind of things. And so you can only go essentially back to work half-time if you take advantage of that. The one thing that's changed on that bill is that now that you can go back to work anywhere. It's taken out that small thing. A lot of people thought that would draw away from the larger counties and people would just automatically do that and not solve the problem at all. One of the interesting things that was brought up, actually was by, JJ's here I think, was by Summer Palmer at Clearfield when we had put a little task force together on these. She thought that these bills were, the 60-day cooling off period was maybe a great way for us, if police officers don't want to be police officers, for them to go cool off for 60 days and then come back to work somewhere else in the things. Carson, you have a question?
Thanks, John. Yeah, we have two similar questions online, and I think I can merge them into the same question. You mentioned that there's been talk of maybe allowing police officers or other public employees to go into other departments. Has this been a broader discussion about public safety employee retention, and recruitment in general? As as some folks online have identified, it's just as hard to keep public employees generally as it is to keep public safety employees.
I think I heard a couple questions in there somewhere. First of all, as it deals with recruitment and retention, when I asked, we had a good discussion in Law Enforcement Legislative Committee last week, because that's been my concern all along. Does this really help? And they do think that would help. Has there been a yes? There's really been no discussion with any legislators that we know of about changing the 60 days to all retirees. It's just never come up. We've obviously, in some of our discussions, we've had those, just our inner discussions. We've talked about whether it would be right to do that, but we don't have any position on that, and no one's proposing anything on that. Yes, Carson.
A comment from Mayor Wilkinson. This is all fine, but in talking with my public safety force, and specifically police, they are more concerned about money for present pay and being able to attract individuals to the profession. Shouldn't that be the first talk and foremost?
Obviously, I'm opining on this, not representing anybody in the league, but and I think I can back up by fact is as you may or may not be aware, we ran a pretty good survey with over 1,000 officers, public safety people anyway, a few months ago, and yes, their number one goal is for recruitment and retention is money. It's not retirement as much, and I think we used that when we talked to that with Representative Gwynn, and that's why he backed off his 20-year retirement. Yes, Brian.
So John, why 60 days? Why not 90 or, the reason I ask is that in a 60-day window, it would be pretty easy. We talked about they can't make a pre-arrangement and then hire somebody later. In a 60-day window, it'd be a lot easier to do that. If you have a 90-day window or a 120-day window, it makes that a lot tougher.
Yeah.
Because you can't keep positions open that long. But a 60-day window, it makes it pretty easy for that to happen, even though it's supposedly illegal.
Yeah.
If it's not enforceable, it's kind of like the speed limit. It's 70, but at 70 is the new 80, right? If it's not rigorously enforced, it's going to happen all the time. And I don't know that, it seems like maybe that window should be a little longer just to discourage any of that nefarious activity from happening.
I think it's Brian, to answer your question, it's an arbitrary number. I'm kind of think that 1 year was an arbitrary number, and so a good round number, but it was 1 year. I don't know. I really don't think that, based on what we talked about earlier, I don't know how you can keep that from happening, whether it's 60, 90, or whatever. But
Well,
I do,
it makes
plus the
it
fiscal
harder to
note,
do it.
the fiscal note would be smaller if we went 90 days too, I think, so.
It would be, if you went out longer, it would be a smaller number, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so why not encourage that to get a smaller fiscal note and help reduce some of that nefarious behavior?
Okay, good point. Any other questions? Carson, any other online?
So I think there's just, sorry, one clarification on my first rambling question. Has the league proposed to the sponsor of either HB 12 or HB 61 the idea of making it apply to all public employees?
No, we just have it. Like I say, we've had some in-house discussion. Most of our conversations with Representative Gwynn has been to get to where he is now and get rid of the 20-year retirement for Tier 2. Okay. Thank you.
All right, I will come swing the PowerPoint. All right. Retail and housing, yep.
Perfect. Pulling up the flow chart.
Yeah, Carson, do we have the flow chart ready to go? On here? With the flow charts? Okay. Yep, do you want to go to that first?
Yeah, well, you want to just exit out?
Yep.
And pull that up first. Greetings, everybody. Thanks to everybody who's here. And then Carson, what is our number of people online? 151 online, plus those of us in the room. So thank you for being here. It's incredibly refreshing to see people at the Capitol after the bizarro world of last legislative session. So thank you both those in person and the 151 online. For the next few minutes, my objective is to get you up to speed on everything that's moving in the housing space, of which retail incentives is a piece, but it's just a piece. A couple of people were mocking me as you walked in today because 15 minutes before LPC, I was frantically updating the PowerPoint presentation based on negotiations from this morning. And there are a lot of moving pieces as all of this is trying to come together. Before I get into specifics of where things are at on both retail incentives and housing in general, please recognize that Justin and I are meeting with league officers on a regular basis. In fact, this morning, President Ramsey, Gary Crane from Layton City, Justin and I met with the Senate President to talk housing and retail incentive-related policy. We have been poring over the LPC survey results that we've referenced multiple times from last fall and figuring out how all the different ideas on the table fit into those LPC survey results, so that as we're reporting back to you each week at LPC, you can see the thought process that's going into the different negotiations. So with that as background, let me give a quick update of where we're at on retail incentives. 2 weeks ago, the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, which is chaired by Governor Cox, endorsed House Bill 151, which you can see with the orange over there. Nothing has changed in the language of House Bill 151 from when we met last week. Meanwhile, the league board took a position to oppose House Bill 151 until certain changes were made. Those changes revolve around the definition of a payment. So right now, House Bill 151 says any use of public funds that incentivizes retail would be prohibited unless it meets certain exceptions. The counter proposal that the league board has directed us to use would say you cannot use sales tax or property tax for a direct incentive unless you met certain criteria. So you have either all public funds versus sales and property tax. The second key distinction is the definition of the recipient, the retail incentive under the House Bill 151. No retailer can receive, or a developer or property owner can receive an incentive unless you meet certain criteria. We have tried to focus on changing the definition of big box that already exists in state code. Right now, that's you cannot directly incentivize a big box of 80,000 square feet or larger. And there's a little bit of wiggle room. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but there's a little bit of wiggle room to focus on that definition if it comes down significantly. And then the Third piece, which is really where all of this kind of turns, is the definition of exceptions. So you can have the broad policy, whether it's our definition or Representative Schultz's definition, but then what are the exceptions that are still authorized? For example, we've successfully negotiated into Representative Schultz's bill the use of incentives for system-wide infrastructure. And so you partner with a developer or property owner that has retail as part of that development, and you partner with them in order to invest in infrastructure that benefits more than just the individual property, but benefits the larger system of infrastructure. We've successfully negotiated that into the House Bill 151, and it's part of our counterproposal. But another key piece of this is what has been referred to up here as the housing exception. In other words, a city under Representative Schultz's proposal and under the league concept would be able to incentivize retail so long as housing was part of the proposal. Now, we're still having a lot of back and forth over what that looks like. The House Bill 151 says it needs to be 50% of the development area has to be housing. So I'm an attorney, not a mathematician, so let's just do some simple math on the fly here. If you have a piece of property that's 10 acres, conceptually 5 acres would have to be housing, 5 would be retail in order to qualify for the retail incentive. Now, a city could still plan for retail for that whole 10 acres. You would just be limited in what incentives you could offer for the full 10 acres. But if you wanted to incentivize certain types of retail, say on the 5 acres, then housing would be on the other 5 acres. Okay, so that's the simple math. Now, the real world math is what does this look like when you have multiple levels of a property? How do you calculate parking, whether it's parking structure versus surface parking? What about landscaping and other amenities that service the housing? What about a small parcel of property that maybe can't accommodate housing itself, but is surrounded by housing? So these are the pieces that we're still trying to work through, and we've met with commercial developers and residential developers and RDA folks trying to figure out how this type of exception would actually work in practice. So at this point, we're not asking the LPC to change the board's recommendation around 151. We're just giving you an update on the different pieces that are being negotiated in this back and forth. Any questions about where things are right now with retail incentives before I jump into the larger piece on housing? I know I'm ignoring Carson for a second just to see if there's anybody in the room first. Carson, I will no longer ignore you. Go ahead.
Mayor Shepherd said that when he spoke to Representative Schultz, he relayed that he left it vague so that the city could determine whether to use square footage or acreage. So just a comment, not a question.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Shepherd, Mayor of Clearfield on the league board. And the league board has spent significant time providing general direction to league staff on this. So Mayor Shepherd, thank you for that feedback. We'll be meeting with Representative Schultz soon as we're finalizing our counter proposal to bring back to him. Okay, so on this one, stay tuned. Just anything you want to add? Oh, jump back to the PowerPoint. The retail incentive language, the retail incentives topic has been a fascinating one to participate in over the last few months. Back in November, the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunities Deputy Director came and spent an hour with the league board talking about the objectives of this bill. Since then, the league board has also met with Representative Steve Waldrop to talk about his objectives with the Commission on Housing Affordability. And I had a very candid conversation with a key legislator on Friday, where this legislator said there's such immense political pressure at the state level right now to do something on housing that we are looking at what other states are doing, but we'd much rather do something in collaboration with local government partners. So this is a bit of a relic of the past. How many of you remember an actual newspaper? I won't ask how many of you not named Andrew Gruber still take a newspaper at your house. Because every so often he'll text me a picture of an article he's been reading in the print edition. Nevertheless, this was the front page of the Deseret News the weekend before the session. Oh no, this was actually last Friday. So for this past weekend about housing, it was on their online edition, that's where I'd actually read it first, but about the missing middle report from the Utah Foundation, which we actually co-sponsored and helped pay for. At the governor's State of the State, which was the day before this came out, this is what the governor said, word for word, about housing and growth. I ask for your support of bills. I added the Representative Schultz piece because I was in a different section of his speech, but he was referencing specifically House Bill 151. So we've had a few cities who've asked us, why are we just not drawing a line in the sand and fighting 151? It's because either 151 will pass in some form, or we try to actually make it workable for local governments. But I ask for your support of bills from Representatives Ferry, Waldrop, Briscoe, and Senator Andrick to remove government regulations that needlessly increase Utah's housing prices. We can increase supply without decreasing quality of life. We cannot let our state become California. That would have been an applause line, I assume, but for the fact there was no applause in the whole speech. Most of these names, well, all but one of these names shouldn't be a surprise to you, because Representative Waldrop, Representative Briscoe, and Senator Andrick are all leaders in the Commission on Housing Affordability. In fact, the League Board last week spent an hour and a half with Representative Waldrop as he was talking about his vision for what he hopes the Commission on Housing Affordability will accomplish this year and in years to come. We referenced this at LPC last week, but we've hired former Representative, former Mayor, former County Commissioner Val Potter. Val, you can wave to the adoring crowd. Val, when he was in the legislature, was also the co-chair on Commission on Housing Affordability, and so has a lot of institutional knowledge in that space. And Val will be helping us navigate the housing issues here over these next few weeks. Here are the potential concerning concepts out there. Now, these are not from the Commission on Housing Affordability yet, okay? But these are, gossip's probably not the right word because it's more than that, but these are the hot topics over the first week of the session of different ideas that people have been throwing out for potential legislation. Number one, a state MIDA-like land use authority that right now would only apply to unincorporated counties. So what we've been told is it wouldn't apply to cities, but it would basically be a state land use authority that would be able to entitle property for a property owner to develop housing if it met certain criteria around affordability and owner-occupied, which gets to this number two piece, development by right. So that a property owner could seek automatic approval if they met certain criteria around affordability or density or the owner-occupied nature of the proposal. And then number three, state minimum zoning in certain areas such as near transportation hubs. We are not surprised by any of this because in many ways it's similar to what, ironically, the California Assembly has passed in recent years. The state of Washington's governor just introduced a package of bills that would accomplish a couple of these things for their legislature to look at this year. And I could actually go state by state, from Massachusetts to New Jersey and others around the country that have similar bills before them. Carson, have I scared anybody online yet? Councilmember Ellsworth?
Yeah, I bet that line about California would have gotten a lot of applause, but I don't understand how we're not being like California when we're applying similar laws from the state level.
Oh, that sounds like an applause line to me. Councilmember.
Has there been any discussion about transportation being available for longer hours? If, you know, housing is going to be more predominant in those areas. So that's one, but also the conversation about existing neighborhoods along these areas and how they're being protected with parking permits for neighborhoods and such things like that, that can really affect a city and change the dynamic of it.
On the first piece, yes, there's been a lot of dialogue about how to secure more funding so that particularly along the Wasatch Front, UTA can extend their operating hours. Salt Lake City entered into a partnership with UTA. Angela, was it been 2 years now? With some of the Invest in Your Future, what's it called? What is it? Funding Our Future, that's right, the alliteration. I can't believe I forgot the alliteration, but yeah, Funding Our Future where Salt Lake City is actually pledging dollars to help extend the service hours of UTA on certain routes. Councilmember, I know the exact neighborhood in my hometown you're referencing, and, right, your neighborhood. And actually, that's been one of the main points that we have been bringing up in conversations about location of transit and the idea of a state top-down approach, whether it's around state highways, transit, whatever the case may be, is you do have a lot of areas where neighborhoods are abutting these transportation corridors. And if the state were to step in and do some sort of mandatory minimum density, one, the infrastructure may not support it, and two, you're going to have incredible friction with residents. And there are multiple cities who saw turnover in their elected officials this year because of this type of tension. And that's a point we have consistently been making to state lawmakers as they look at these different types of top-down approaches. Now, that's the bad news, okay? So I'm starting at the scary level. Now let's talk about the really productive conversation the league board had with Representative Waldrop last week. It is unheard of. Oh, I was so close to trying to lift people's spirits. Carson.
We'll just dwell a little bit longer in the dark area. So first, from Mayor Bruno in Springdale, the town of Springdale has seen a sharp increase in the conversion of long-term rentals to short-term or overnight rentals, which has made finding housing difficult for our residents and workforce. Our code provides for nightly rentals in commercial zones. We have changed our code to allow for long-term rentals in both internal and detached ADUs. We prohibit short-term rentals in our residential zones and do what we can to address illegal short-term rentals. With the state restriction on using advertising as evidence to penalize, it is more difficult to address the illegal issue. We need to use we need to have the language removed from state code that prohibits this option. We can't wait until next year. We ask that the league make this a priority and work with the appropriate legislators to address this. So this is a nice softball question for you. And then I have a few more, but do you want to hit that one first?
Sure. In fact, short-term rentals came up as part of the discussion with the board last week. And Springdale's Councilmember Lisa Zumpt has been on our work group as we've been working on potential approaches on short-term rentals. So, Mayor, you're not the only community mayor who has this challenge. I could give you a list of others, and it is on our proactive ask list. It's a matter of how that piece fits with all of the other moving pieces on housing. In the board meeting last week, Representative Waldrop specifically referenced short-term rentals as something that needed to be looked at due to the impact on housing availability and housing affordability. We actually commissioned research through the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute about the proliferation of short-term rentals in recent years and the impact on housing supply, and we've shared those results with Representative Waldrop. Here are the main takeaways from that 90-minute conversation, and any board members, either online or in person, who want to speak up, please do so. Number one, he's very enthusiastic about SB 34+, which is the bill that we proactively brought to him based on feedback from league members over the course of the last few months. One, trying to get a better sense of the data on the ground, and this also gets to the short-term rental piece because we've got that Gardner Policy Institute data that we can plug in there. It also calls for improving the prioritization process for how the state uses their dollars when they are funding infrastructure projects in communities, and really providing that incentive to communities to go above and beyond SB 34 to qualify for those state dollars. The second piece we talked about was intelligent regional solutions. That was his term in the board meeting, which ranged from everything from supporting cities who are doing their part to plan to the public engagement effort around growth. The governor's budget calls for $1 million for this public engagement effort, and we're on the front lines of those conversations with him and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, Wasatch Front Regional Council, and others for that outreach and engagement effort. And the third piece is what he referred to as transformational policy. And the transformational policy, he acknowledged, still needed to be thought through. So he threw different ideas out to the board gave him their feedback, but they ranged from this concept of a fair share of where there would be some sort of threshold that would apply to communities around the state so that not all affordable housing is located in one area, but every city would have some sort of obligation to plan for affordable housing. But he acknowledged that he didn't know what that metric would be and really wanted to spend the time and energy during the interim in 2022 to talk about what that could look like. And he said multiple times, I get one size misfits all, because communities are unique depending on infrastructure and geographic location. But he wants to do a deep dive there. We talked about this housing and transportation nexus concept and the state role around transportation hubs. So it really was a tremendous back and forth conversation with him. I'm going to pause there before I keep going to see if any board members want to speak up about the meeting with Representative Waldrop. No, it's up to you. Okay. No, it's up to you. Okay, so go Mayor Ramsey and then Carson Ray's.
Okay. Just that, I appreciate that. I think most of us walked away from that meeting understanding that he does want to understand. He does want to understand and kind of work together. He said a couple of times that he wasn't here for the early on days of the narrative that cities, don't care, don't get it, aren't doing anything, and he said, I don't know where that comes from, but I really do. I want to engage. I want to sit down and come up with solutions together. And I believe that. I do believe that. And I am grateful for that. I appreciate that he didn't come and just talk to us and say, this is what we're doing and this is why. He really gave some good explanation and he listened. And 90 minutes was a long time for him to be there with us, and we appreciated that. But I think we've got a lot of work to do. But I agree with him on his point about the data. The state doesn't have the data. A lot of us in this room, we know what our cities are doing. We know what each other's cities are doing. I can think of so many cities around the state that I know what you're doing with housing. And there's not a place that the state has that information. The data does not have a home that state legislators can look at and go, oh, I think I didn't even realize that there were 20,000 entitled units right off the freeway in Vineyard. I think I didn't realize XYZ. Fill in your city. That receptacle doesn't exist. So what we need to do is make sure that we are working on data. So taking the next year to really work on a better way to collect the data, I think is going to benefit us as cities, because I think if we can have a place that the reality of what's taking place can reside, we can help change the narrative and allow better information that I think is actually going to be beneficial for at least a lot of our cities, that we don't have this statewide lack of working on housing. He was really open to that.
Thank you, Mayor. And we did appreciate Representative Waldrop's time with us and his passion for this subject. I'm speaking on behalf of St. George, Springdale, Moab, Park City, and saying that we have been patient when it comes to short-term rentals. And I think all of our communities have individually tried to and done a good job of addressing affordable housing in our communities. And we're a combination of resort communities, and St. George is kind of a hybrid of a resort and a regular, normal city. And these short-term rental impacts to us, both housing cost-wise and permanent housing-wise, is really hurting us. And every year since that law went into effect, we've been told next year, next year, next year. With what we're doing this year and the good faith that we've shown as cities, in all of our cities, in approving multiple multifamily units, along with all of the single-family units that we have approved, we think that this year is the time when we're talking about SB 34 plus to address short-term rentals, so we can get those homes open to permanent residents of our community. And I'd invite any of the other cities that I mentioned to chime in if they support that.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Sean. Carson from online.
So first I have a comment from Councilmember Egbert, and then I have a comment from Paul Larson, which might help you segue. So first, Councilmember Egbert said, I appreciated his use of the phrase housing that is affordable instead of purely affordable housing. They have different implications and allow for more dialogue and flexibility. And then the second comment from Paul Larson is, will the legislature appropriate any funding to help us with these mandates, planning, et cetera?
Sure. Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember. She's on the league. Councilmember Egbert's on the league board and was in that meeting with Representative Waldrop. Mayor, I think I saw your hand.
Sorry, I can't get my mask off. you know, when you talk about taking houses from being short-term rentals to full-time homes, how do you deal with the fact that somebody who's renting their home for $2,000 a week, now are they going to take less for that? I mean, it's a real moneymaker for people, and how do we turn that down?
So this gets back to the ability of cities and really for property owners to know that a neighborhood is designed for full-time residents in mind, as opposed to turning the house into the motel. And right now, it turns into a bit of a profit center. So cities have tried different approaches, ranging from code enforcement to the fee structure, but you still can't get in front of the economics of the situation. And so the language that Sean was referencing really is about language the legislature put in that the league did support several years ago that makes it harder to enforce based on advertisements. But there's a recognition, including from the governor, that that language has likely gone too far, which is why we've put it on the table as part of these overall discussions. So we had a follow-up, and then
I just had a lady in my office last week who said, we're not against high density. There are condominiums in our neighborhood, that's okay, but half of them are rentals. So can you make some kind of a rule so that they can't be rentals? But
full-time rentals or short-term rentals?
Either one. But we don't live in Russia. We can't.
Right.
We can't say people, if you buy that as an investment, you can't rent it.
Right. Yeah, it's tricky. There's a lot of emphasis up here right now on trying to facilitate owner-occupied units because, in fact, I'll show you this data point that we put in our legislative guide that we shared at LPC last week, and hopefully everybody's seen it. The legislative guide's on the website, but this just shows you the trend over the last few years on housing permits. So we pulled this from the Gardner Policy Institute, and you can see that just the partial year of 2021 through October, in fact, it was October 1, right, Carson? Was it October 1 or October 31? Okay, so October 31st, there were more residential permits that cities had authorized than any time in state history, and that was still 2 more months to go. So we're waiting for the final 2 months of the data to come through, but it will shatter the record. And the orange is for multifamily, the blue is for single family. Unfortunately, a lot of those multifamily units are not owner-occupied units, which then puts a different squeeze on the market for those who are looking for owner-occupied housing. So, Carson, I thought I saw your hand, and then I saw another hand here, and then I'll move on to what we need to deliberate on. Was it Tani?
Okay.
And then I need to answer Paul's question.
So I'll just be really quick. I just wanted to add that the LPC had a working group on short-term rentals, as Cameron mentioned, and that group identified sort of a framework of how to approach the issue, recognize that property owners have rights and cities can't fiat short-term rentals out of existence, but that currently short-term rentals, if they're not compliant with the law because it's largely unenforceable, then they're operating at an uneven playing field for both hotels and for long-term rentals and for housing units. So the group's focus was sort of to figure out a way to give cities back the authority to make sure everybody's on the same playing field and has an equal competitive advantage. So yeah, just to mention on that. If anyone has questions on short-term rentals, they can follow up with me afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Carson. And again, we have collected data for the short-term rental units in every city and county in the state. We've shared that with Representative Waldrop, and we've seen a dramatic increase over the last 3 years in the number of short-term rental units that have appeared in the market. And those are units that previous to 3 years ago would be full-time, would be units for full-time residents. Paul Larson, in answer to your question, yes, we are seeking technical assistance dollars to help communities comply with SB 34 and SB 34 plus. There are technical assistance dollars in the governor's budget at our request, both through the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and through the Department of Transportation. So still a lot of moving parts about how much it'll be, what the scope will be. We have a meeting actually this afternoon with the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget to talk in part about these dollar requests. Is there another hand? Tani, did you have your hand, or Mayor Burton? Okay.
I'm going to back up to SB 34.
Yep.
When SB 34 came out and the league made the adjustments on there, it was a good deal because it gave the information to the legislators what us as cities are doing. And I think for a big part, they didn't see that. Now that it's been out there a couple of years, I appreciate those legislators who are paying attention to see what we're doing, to see that we care, that we've been working on this. This is a good statistic to show that even before SB 34, we were working on those items. I just hoping that we can get this message out to the other legislators to let them know that we are doing the job, we are accomplishing it, we want their help, we don't want them taking over.
Well, Mayor Burton, I couldn't have said it better myself. The term that we're hearing over and over and over again up here is that the state wants to provide political cover to cities. And by providing political cover, that's either taking away the decisions from the city level and investing it in a regional body or a state body so that when residents are mad about growth, the city can basically say, it's not our choice anymore, it's this other group. Or political cover in the sense of, we have to allow this project because the state has told us we have to allow it, and that provides you with political cover. And we've been pushing back on that principle in every setting, in every conversation. But it is paramount that the 200+ people who are in this meeting right now are also pushing back on that narrative, because it shouldn't be about political cover. It should be about the partnerships and how we work together to make sure that state infrastructure dollars, local planning are aligned and are accomplishing good outcomes. And that message was heard loud and clear at the Salt Lake County Council of Governments meeting last Thursday. So, Mayor, thank you for getting that started. I've actually wrote up a summary of that I've shared with Representative Waldrop. But just know, as you meet with your legislators, whether it's today, tomorrow, texting with them, whatever the case may be, that's a narrative that they're hearing, is this concept of political cover. So let me jump then to a couple of key points of what is in circulation, because we need some feedback about what's in circulation. So as a reminder about SB 34 and SB 34 Plus, this was information the DWS provided to us about which cities currently are not in compliance with SB 34. And keep in mind, under current law, the way you comply with SB 34 is you have to submit a report that demonstrates what you have been doing over the course of the year around planning for moderate income housing. So you simply have to submit the report in order to comply. Now, we got this info from DWS. We have not independently certified it. In many ways, we're giving you this as a warning for those of you whose names may appear up here, that based on the data that DWS gave us, that you're not listed in compliance. And then we have a second category of those that submitted after December 1st, that under SB 34 Plus, you would not have a rolling deadline. December 1st would be the hard deadline. And then SB 34 Plus requires you to show how you're implementing, and then also includes eligibility for potential additional state infrastructure dollars. So in other words, if you're Cameron City and you're implementing your menu items, planning for moderate income housing, in addition to qualifying for state transportation investment dollars, you would also qualify for the ARPA local match if the legislature funds that again this upcoming session, and we are seeking significant money to fund that again in 2022. So that's a quick snapshot of some of the key distinctions. We're still waiting for this bill. The Commission on Housing Affordability had their hearing about these concepts in mid-December. I had a call Saturday night where they told me they were getting close to a protected copy that we could review. As of the last time I looked at my email an hour ago, that still hasn't come through yet, and have some follow-up meetings with stakeholders tomorrow. But SB 34 Plus is just one piece of the overall dialogue on housing. You have the retail incentives bill, SB 34 Plus, and two other pieces that for now are focused around transit. Before I jump into those two, yes, yep.
If I may, if any of you are looking at the list of cities and feeling a bit defensive, going, what do you mean we turned our report in late? Or what do you mean we're not compliant? You're not alone. There were several of us at the league board meeting that went, wait, what? And I even started texting our staff. I thought, wait a minute, why was ours not in on time? I know we had a conversation, but I can't remember the details till Gary Hill from Bountiful stood up and then was brilliant and reminded me, and I went, oh yeah, that's right. And I did not text our staff because I remembered. We were sure to point out that the information that came from DWS this year was very outdated, and it made being able to do the report impossible. We could not do it. And then I remembered, oh yes, I know exactly where I was sitting when our staff said to me, so what do we do about this? The information is outdated coming from DWS, so our report information can't be submitted accurately. How do we go about this? And so just letting you know, if that was the case for your city, a lot of us understand, right? We do understand, and we expressed to Representative Waldrop, so that needs to be worked on as well. That information needs to be accurate and on time so that we get it and can work with it. Because we don't want to just be checking a box. What good is SB 34 if we're just checking a box and the data isn't valid? The information isn't good. The whole point is that we need good data. So we need the right tools to be able to collect good data. Anyway, just wanted to reassure, if I'm seeing faces, I'm seeing conversations and texts, I'm like, oh yeah, we did that at our board meeting. Several of us were like, wait, what? Why is my city listed there? Just wanted to make sure that you know that we do know and that we express that to Representative Waldrop as well.
And Mayor, I'm glad you brought that up, because the other piece that came up is DWS is going through a transition in the new administration. Christina Oliver, who many of you may have worked with in her time previously in Salt Lake County and most recently in Draper City, is now overseeing the housing division. She's the one who actually called me Saturday night as we were talking through what may or may not be in the CHA bill. She is reconfiguring the staff so that we can get to fulfilling the intent of the data around SB 34, so that it's useful both for you as policymakers, but also useful to state leaders as well.
And please don't misunderstand, I'm not trying to throw DWS under the bus. I'm just acknowledging a lot of us do understand that that information wasn't accurate and that that's why it was unique. But it also is a good illustrator as to why SB 34 isn't even going to work with reporting and collecting data if we don't have all the right tools in place to be able to accurately reflect what's happening. So anyway, appreciate Christina's team working through that, but we did explain to Representative Waldrop, there's a reason that these cities are listed here, and it was not entirely their fault. So
Right.
anyway, just
Well,
know that we know that.
And Meg Ryan on our staff, she's our land use manager. She convened a group of key planners from cities ranging from Holiday to Clearfield to get feedback about what was working and what wasn't working on SB 34, which is in large part where the concepts in SB 34 plus came from, was that group of planners in conjunction with the Wasatch Front Regional Council. So here's the framework as of 1:07 p.m. on January 24th. Okay, so if this were a football game, this would be like taking the field for warm-ups. So there's a long ways to go until Ohio State kicks a field goal on the second to last play of the game. Yeah, I know. Almost it was magical, but could have been even more magical. SB 34 plus, the retail incentives language with ideally that workable housing piece that recognizes the different situations that communities are in. This third piece I'm going to reference briefly, and that's HTRZ expansion. So for those of you who are new, this is a fun acronym, Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone. Is it transit or transportation? Okay, I was right. Okay, I was trying to read your face through the mask, and I thought maybe I'd misspoken. So Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone. We created this tool last year. The league supported it, Wasatch Front Regional Council and others working with Senator Harper. And right now, this tool allows for cities to initiate land use planning around a front-runner station that if it meets certain criteria around density and affordability and economic opportunity and the like, that it can actually trigger mandatory participation from other property taxing entities to help fund infrastructure. Okay? So right now, state of the law, it only affects front-runner stations. We've been in dialogue all off-season over whether or not that concept should apply to other transit stops. And the answer right now is to be determined. There's been a lot of good back and forth with the counties and school districts because ultimately their tax increment would be automatically captured. But part of the reason for the HTRZ tool is to try to maximize the land use planning outcomes around those front-runner stations. Right now, tracks only exists in Salt Lake County. You have BRT coming in Weber County, exists in Utah County. So there's been this back and forth over whether HTRZs should expand to those additional stations. Realistically, if it does expand, it's only going to expand incrementally. It's not going to expand overnight to anybody who has a station, okay? Which is where this other piece comes into play. Over the last few days, as we've been meeting with Representative Waldrop and other stakeholders, including the Utah Transit Authority, we've been having discussions around station area plans and requiring cities or unincorporated counties that have BRT, tracks, front runner, or other types of high-frequency transit off the Wasatch Front to have a station area plan that would meet certain criteria, certain objectives, including around housing affordability and economic opportunity and the like, which then the city and UTA would have to adopt, and it would be some type of overlay zone so that there would be some certainty of what that zoning is, and then potentially adjusting referendum thresholds related to those station area plans. There's also discussion about adjusting referendum thresholds, local referendum thresholds in general as it relates to land use or housing, but we've been having that conversation specifically in this station area plan piece. Councilmember.
This is great for those who exist along the front runner stations and even track stations and BRT stations and stuff like that. We've been, in the West, have been told basically by UTA, if we build it, they will come. So this is not going to help any of us because they will never commit to where something's going or anything. And so we don't know where to put housing density or any of these things to set up a station area plan. Like currently they're coming in and putting stuff next to existing, they're putting parking rides and stuff next to existing housing. Like
right.
how do we address the fact that UTA, unless you're along the I-15 corridor, UTA is always late to the game, and we're gonna be built out before we ever see any of these facilities incorporated into our city.
Yeah, that is the multi-billion-dollar question, and it's not just those of you on the west side. Your colleagues on the east side would say the same thing, that they're waiting for their east-west connectivity. And if you think back to 1999 when track first opened, the Blue Line first opened, the Blue Line basically, and still does, runs through an industrial area. So now you're seeing the infill development in historic industrial areas. So it's a very fair point. And the thought process for us over these last few days as we've been working on the station area piece was to try to address some of the concepts that have been arising with the that state MIDA type authority, because my hunch is if I were to ask for a show of hands of how many people, in fact, I'll just do that. For a quick show of hands, how many people are concerned about the concept of a state MIDA-like authority that would have land use authority around the state? I'm pretty sure they do, based on all the hands that just went up. Wow, 2 hands. I didn't know you could still lift both hands. That's great. I'm going, Carson, to assume that online the answer would be the same, but I would welcome people to acknowledge. And Carson, you should just tell people that I think every hand in this room went up when I asked that question. So recognizing that idea is floating out there, and that idea has been floating in the context of being around high-capacity transportation corridors, we thought, well, let's start by looking at the existing transit and where there are opportunities to maximize the land use around existing transit, and recognize that there are going to be more BRT lines, if not TRAX lines. There will be more BRT lines in progress where this type of requirement would come into play. Currently, only about a quarter of our transit stops in the UTA district have station area plans, because it's not required. So at the very least, we could go back to legislative leadership and other stakeholders and say this will move the needle for a lot of transit stops, existing transit stops and planned transit stops, because so few already have these station area plans. Now, for Saratoga Springs or for Cottonwood Heights or anybody in between that may not have a station that would qualify here, the potential default that worries us is what they proposed 5 years ago, which was anywhere there is state transportation infrastructure, the state would mandate or control the zoning around it. So that was an actual proposal that we defeated in the 2018 session. And so if you think about Farmington, I'm looking to see if I have anybody from Farmington in the room. Carson, is Shane or Mary Anderson or Brigham online? But we've all been to Lagoon, right? So think about the city of Farmington that has Highway 89, I-15, and Legacy, and the Front Runner station, or the Front Runner line, all running through a pretty narrow city. So if you were to have like the state mandated zoning around the transportation corridor, there's not much of Farmington left. So what we're trying to say is, rather than going down that path, let's start with station area plans, and let's set the stage for the conversation with Representative Waldrop in the off-season around those transformational ideas that haven't been fully fleshed out yet. But let's, between SB 34 plus, which applies to every city above 10,000, retail incentives, which would apply to every city in the urban areas, so both of those apply to the Saratoga Springses and the Conwood Heightses of the world. Then HDRZ and stationary plans apply to transit cities. That's a pretty robust policy proposal around housing that is consistent with our LPC survey results and would move the needle in a positive way. I'm going to stop talking for a second to see if there's nobody over here. And other thoughts about these general concepts, recognizing that only retail incentives has bill language, and we're still opposed to it right now based on the drafting. But the other three all have concepts that are working their way toward a legislative bill. Well, I'm not sure how to read the silence if it's. So, Mayor Ramsey.
I think everybody's just kind of sucking from a fire hose right now. Some of us have been here for a while, and it's even a lot to try to figure out, what is this going to mean for my city, for our stops, for us? How does this apply to us? Does this apply if we have buses? Does this, you know what I mean? And then recognizing that we've got a lot of new people here who are going, what have I gotten into? You know, I recognize that. I think that's what the silence is from. Everybody will have a little bit of time to process this. It will continue to come together. We'll keep working on it. We'll get there. There will be a lot more input, I'm sure, as this continues down the road.
Well, that's an excellent point, Mayor. And we're not asking for a vote on any of these right now because 3/4 of them aren't even in bill shape yet. But we wanted to be as transparent with you as possible about where all the moving pieces are. One, so you can think about how they would impact your city, because it's going to impact Kaysville differently than it's going to impact Taylorsville. So making sure you're thinking through that and getting us feedback. So an easy example, we've asked for feedback for months on the retail incentives. We're basically swimming in feedback on that. Like, we know where the cities are and what the impacts are. We've been able to articulate that. In fact, Mayor, you should know we met with Senator Harper last week, and John Hiskey was there. Great conversation, walking him through our concept. So he's been a great ally behind the scenes there. But a couple of these are new in the last few days. So that's why we wanted to get them out to you so you could be chewing on them. And if your city has front runner, tracks, BRT now or planned, and not just in the next 30 years, they might get around to doing something. But, you know, I'm thinking about like the BRT line on US 89 in South Davis County. We need your feedback as soon as possible about what these concepts could mean in your city. So as this dialogue continues, and it's changing by the hour, we know how to best shape it in something that's workable. Mr. Gruber.
So as you all are thinking about these concepts that Cameron is talking about, HTRZ expansion and requirement for station area plans, I think it's critical to recognize that the notion for both of these is that the city brings them forward. It is the city that says, we know our local context the best, we have control, and we decide what we think makes most sense for development in our community. Now, there might be some standards or objectives that would be, in theory, shared objectives that the state and the region and the city and the county would all generally want to have accomplished. But the approach that we are collectively taking is that the city is in the driver's seat in figuring out how do we want to develop in our area, as opposed to some of the other concepts that Cameron was talking about, where there is a one-size-fits-all or misfits-all dictate that comes down from the state as to how you must develop. That's the principle that we're trying to adhere to.
And I made the quip earlier, thank you, Andrew, when Councilmember Ellsworth asked about the California connection, and this is the big distinction. What Andrew just described is that everything that is on this screen, well, not everything, but SB 34 plus, HDRZs, and the stationary plan concept, they are all still locally initiated, as opposed to the California model, which is that top-down model. So I thought I saw JJ's hand. Oh, was there, sorry, JJ. Let's go Mayor Burton and then JJ.
I'm closer. West Jordan has a track line that goes through there. It has several stations.
6 stations, right?
That's right. Good job. Now, if you could help the legislators understand that, that'd be really good. One of the
You could
stations,
too.
which is right by City Hall, it's a track station, it's a
Yeah.
great spot. It's a perfect location for your TOD. We've been trying for years to put one in there. But the state just comes in and says, no, you should put one in there and force it upon us. But that's what spot where we want to do it anyway. But if they would help us with it instead of forcing it upon us and kind of see what our needs are, that would be great. Some of the stations, there's not a good location for it. Some are. We have a couple of other TODs in the city already. This would be another one would be put in there. And what we'd really like, instead of fighting against them, is just work with them. If they could help us and work together, we could accomplish some great things.
Well, on your particular property on Redwood, you have a recalcitrant property owner that complicates the redevelopment of that site. Because you're right, that's a perfect location for it. And right now, you've got City Hall, a road, huge parking lot, empty retail, and the track station. A destination. Yep, I hear you. JJ?
Yeah, just some quick feedback on, especially the third bullet point, a little bit on the fourth.
Okay.
In Clearfield, we have a front runner station. And a few years back, we did complete a station area plan. So we were already kind of ahead of the game on that a bit. The HTRZ, well, we created a CDA. So the current terminology is CRA. So this goes back several years. We created a CDA. The HTRZ just really doesn't do anything for us unless expansion of it includes some component to allow us to layer that on top of the existing CDA. That's just our own experience, but we realize that the HTRZ brings with it some tools that we don't currently have. They're inaccessible to us right now because of what we've already done.
Right, so I'll address the first piece on, in fact, you have a stationary plan already in place. I mentioned that there are 18 stations that already have those stationary plans. And Clearfield is used up here on a regular basis as a shining star of how we get this going, recognizing that you have all the battle scars from years and years of trying to get that property off the ground. With respect to the HTRZ expansion, there's been a lot of back and forth this interim, about how it dovetails into existing CDAs or CRAs. And Andrew, I'm only going to put you on the spot if you want to be put on the spot, but my recollection is that we still hadn't gotten to a simple answer yet about the overlap and the layering of HTRZs and CRAs. But if you have more updates, by all means.
You're correct, there's no simple answer, and the point that JJ raises is a critical one. And so what we anticipate, JJ, is that as it stands now, this year, we will not see legislation that allows for those tools to overlap with each other, because the more you dig into it, the more complicated it gets. Of course, it is at a city's discretion whether if you think the HTRZ tool is a more preferable tool, you could collaboratively work to terminate a CRA and flip to an HTRZ. But as it stands right now, you're right, and we don't expect that's going to change this session, that they would be overlapped with each other.
Recognizing that we are starting to bump up against 1:30, and we still have a couple other bills we need to bring up to you, let me close just with this. From the time that I got to the Capitol this morning till now, things have moved in the housing space. And that's going to be the name of the game this session when it comes to housing and land use and transportation, even more so than in past years. Now, the good news is this. We have legislators who have been really invested over the last year working with cities, trying to understand our perspectives. And I think there's a sincere interest from them of making sure that whatever happens on the housing space is collaborative. That's one piece. The second piece is we've proactively brought ideas forward, both in bill form and in concept form, that's also helping steer the ship a little bit. Now, the bad news is there are some really bad ideas that are out there, and things are going to move quickly. So we'll keep you posted as much as possible, and as bills come out, we'll send them out, and we'll take positions at LPC and be utilizing the officers in between LPCs. So your key takeaway when it comes to housing and the like right now, number one, talk to your legislators. And today, make sure you're having conversations with your legislators about the West Jordan story or about what's happening with housing in your city. And then from a philosophical perspective, have the conversation with your legislators about partnering with local government. Say, we don't want political cover, we want partnerships. Here's what those partnerships could look like. And so don't let your legislator feel like she or he is doing you a favor with political cover, when in actuality what we want is the partnership to plan together in a collaborative way. Okay, with that, Justin, I'll turn it back to you to hit those last couple of bills and ratify positions of what's out. There's the railroad bill and last thing, if you're a city with transit, shoot us an email. Basically, the feedback JJ just gave us is the perfect example of the type of feedback we'll be seeking over these next few days.
Let's research and let's get out.
Oh,
I think we're going to ratify positions, and we'll hit other ones quickly. A couple quick reminders before we get to this. We have daily briefing calls at 10:15. You're welcome to join those if you want to. You certainly don't need to join those if you don't want to. But we do talk about all the bills that are coming up that day in committee, and sometimes make if something's changed, we also talk about how we want to strategically deal with that as well. So if you need those, please reach out to us. We can make sure you have those invites if you haven't seen them. And I am going to just open this up. If you want to see what I'm seeing without looking at the screen, if you go to ulct.org, on your phone, there's a bill tracking icon there, and that will take you to our bill tracker, which I'm going to pull up here really quick. If you want to find it, if you go to advocacy, then bill tracking on our website, this will show our bill track. So a couple things here. This is the staff has gone in here and consulting with board members, other members of the LPC. We've gone in and put in recommended positions on these bills. Not every bill has a position right now. Some of them say position pending. And that's because, one, we have really smart staff, but we don't know everything. We're trying to figure out what some of these bills do. And so we may need help figuring out what some of the bills do. And two, because we know there's substitutes coming and we don't want to take a position until we see the substitute out there and see exactly what it is. There it is. There's our bill tracker. And help me explain this if I'm not explaining it well, Carson or Cam. Whoever's done this more, but basically we take a motion to ratify the positions that we have currently on the bill tracker, always with the understanding that this is a very living document. This thing changes more than hourly as we're tracking bills, but this helps us get direction as we go into the committee meetings, as we go into negotiations, to help us know which ones are we definitely opposing, which ones are we definitely supporting, which ones do we have some room to work on. Cam or Carson, anything you want to add to that? So Carson does want to add.
I'll just give a quick procedural note. If there are any of these that you want to pull out of this, these aren't final positions. These bills still have a long ways to go. Again, this is just guidance for staff, but if you see any of these that you feel very strongly should be pulled out of this motion, then you could do that with is that 50 or 60% vote? Roger's online, so I can't really look to him right now, but that's the process for moving them. If a bill passes with a staff position, then we can reconsider it next week, but please bring it to our attention if you feel very strongly that we have misdialed a position.
Okay. Cam, go ahead.
Right, I just want to clarify one thing Carson said there. Consensus within the league means 60% of LPC voting members, okay? That is important. During my time, we've had bills that the league members have been back and forth, and if we don't get to 60% of LPC voting members, we don't take a position because we don't have consensus. So what Carson says is accurate. If there's any bill that you want to pull out, make that motion now. Otherwise, we'd welcome a motion to ratify the staff recommendations. That has to pass then with the 60% because that demonstrates consensus within the league. And then all of this is on the website. It's updated multiple times a day, and this will be the regular vote every Monday to ratify. So Mayor Ramsey, I'll turn it to you to accept a motion to either pull a bill out, and if nobody has that motion, then a motion to ratify the recommended positions.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to pull anything out? Does anybody have something specific you're concerned about? Or at this point, very early on in the process, remembering that this is a living process that will be amended. Gary?
HB 95, that's Representative Ward's landscaping bill. I'd make a motion, we approve this list with the amendment that we move that bill to oppose until amended.
And that one's currently, sorry, Mayor, I'll stick.
So, Mayor Ramsey, you've got a.
You are welcome to go in front of me.
Got a motion from Gary Hill and a
Got a
second from Mayor
motion to
Burton.
pull 95,
Well, just to
just to
modify 90
change,
yeah.
to oppose until we see what that looks like. Today, to oppose that bill.
So it's,
In its current,
Yeah.
yes,
amended,
in its
yeah.
current form, right, okay. We have a second by Mayor Burton. Any additional discussion on that? Okay, and does your motion include approving everything else as it's currently, we're gonna ratify? All right. Okay, we have a motion to ratify the entire list, changing 95 to oppose in its current form until it's modified, and we will continue to monitor that and bring that back. Any additional discussion to that?
Let me make one final clarification too. You'll usually be able to see the color code of what's a high priority, medium priority, low priority. That's the work, watch, monitor, or hot work, watch, monitor. So, you also have the right to say, we think this bill should be a higher priority or a lower priority. This will become more clear as we get into the session. As you can see, we're already tracking how many bills? It's
A lot.
6.
over 80.
Yeah, yeah, we'll be well very soon.
Okay, Carson, is there anybody online who had anything? Discussion on that? Okay, all in favor of approving the motion to ratify this list with the amendment of 95, opposing HB 95 in its current form until it's amended, and we'll bring that back for discussion. All in favor, please say aye. And if you're online, please enter your vote into the chat. Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Final motion to adjourn.
Yep, I think that's what we have. All right. Unless there's any other questions, I am prepared to ask for a motion to adjourn, but first, just want to reassure all of our friends who are new, all of you who this is brand new for you. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of faces, and I remember sitting in your chair 4 years ago and going, whoa. Anyway, it's going to be okay, and the process is great, and we're going to get through it, and it'll be collaborative, and you'll get more used to it as it goes. Anyway, don't walk away just going, I don't know about this. Yeah, it's going to be okay. Yeah. With that, is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you. We have a motion.
Yep,
Tim Tingey with
and then
Cottonwood Heights.
Providence Mayor. Over the-
All right, and a second. All in favor, please say aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.